Right? So first it's that stop, that interruption, that pause. And then the second part is the question or the what if. And so, most people, when we think about what if questions, we use them looking backwards with regret. What if I hadn't gone into that line of work? What if I hadn't gotten married? What if all these things, I hadn't taken that job? And, instead, what if we use what if questions to take the moment and then look forward. And I like to always think of it like, whatever you have in front of you, right? Normally, we're only looking at the one right in front of us. But what if there's other things I'm not seeing here? What if this is a issue that actually could make us better, not weaker? I mean, you could just have all these different ways. And so what it allows me to do is to change my perspective and also create new options. But the third step, and I think the key is and there's a whole lot of stuff right out around there around, stopping and pausing or mindset. But one of the things I found is that the third step is the most important. As simple as it sounds, is the third step is go. Right? Because people talk about mind shifts changes, and then they just go back to what they were doing. Right? So the third step is go. I like to always say that, knowledge without application has no value. Right? A new perspective without application changes nothing. When a leader in an organization has the ability to see different perspectives, I think it really, again, opens up where when we see this perspective, there's opportunities to potentially elevate our customer experience, our customer service of when we're to move into, a different area. And I think it's when you constantly are looking for a different perspective, again, I think it definitely gives you a real advantage. But, I was trying to balance talking with the staff and taking care of this problem. And after I left, the store manager called me and she said, so-and-so was devastated. I'm like, what? And she goes, yeah, they're just devastated. She had all these things she wanted to share with you. And she just didn't feel you gave her the time. Right? And so my first reaction, right, is to be in defense. Well, I've got a lot of problems. I'm in charge of a lot of things. Right? But, right, I think true leadership is how I can make any person feel when I'm with them. And I think when I'm making sure that I am present, that I'm engaged, and I am listening, that, maybe sure I couldn't maybe give her an hour. But I think what she was really upset with, right, is that I just did not give her the moment that she deserved. And a lot of times we think leadership lessons, people think of the big running an organization and 5-year plan and all that. I think, real leadership happens in the moment, and I think it's won or lost right there. I've worked with a lot of new frontline employees, and this one sounds a little simple or you've heard before, but if I looked at everything and say, what is the one mistake that they've all made? It is thinking that they have to have the answers. And especially with frontline managers who are new, they're fearful of showing a weakness. But, I think there's real strength in saying, well, I'm not sure. What do you think? And so, especially right in that first year or so when people move into a leadership role, it's thinking that they have to show strength when, I think showing vulnerability and empathy is an incredible leadership trait.
I agree. I think vulnerability is strength, in fact. It's in my, if I had a list like a top 10 leadership myths, that would be in like number 1 or 2 consistently, because it's so damaging to people's like mental health as well when they're in those positions and they think they have to project strength or whatever. And it goes wrong quite quickly. But I think the other reason why you shouldn't do that and why you should be, as you say, like being a bit vulnerable, asking, what do you think? How do you think we should handle this? That's such an amazing and easy way of building trust with the people that you are now leading when you're a new leader. Because that's another thing that people really worry about and struggle with at the start is, how do I get these people to trust me?
You know, one of the ways I could judge when I ran this 100-store chain is I could tell whether the leadership or customers were more important. And how I could tell is if I was visiting a location and a customer walked in, would they walk away from me mid-sentence or not? And if they walked away mid-sentence, then they showed me that the customer was the priority.
I will just caveat and say I'm not claiming to be perfect on this, but I think there is something else that's important here, is adaptability, changing with the times and applying the lessons you learn. Because there are parts of that we've talked about here, and I'm sure the same is probably true for you, where we're railing against things being done the wrong way, but we probably did those ourselves back in the day because, as you've just said, that's the way it was done. But I think the important thing is, once you realize it doesn't work and or it's not the right thing to do, you stop doing it. Anyway.
Yeah, and I think you have to question yourself, right? I mean, I think
absolutely.
I had a guy who used to always say, he'd talk about a manager or a leader, he'd say, right, he says, well, the problem is that person believes their own press clippings. And so, right, and so I think you have to constantly question yourself, am I really the person I say that I am?
Yeah.
And there's always going to be a little bit of a gap because we're human.
Of course.
But keep that gap narrow. You'll keep that gap narrow just by questioning yourself on a daily basis.